gentlemen, my name is Sarah, and it's a huge, huge honor today to invite you to another episode of Technology Foresight. Preceding this was an excited discussion about quantum computing, but we will get to that. And before we get to that, it's my honor to introduce Christoph Kirsch, who's a professor at Salzburg University, but also principal investigator at Big Code Research Laboratory here at the Czech Technical University. Hello, Christoph.
Hi, Sarah.
Hello. We met like a year ago in your kitchen when we were with David Pešek when we were discussing about technology, and that was the first time where I got to know your really impressive CV and life journey from kind of Berkeley to Salzburg to now to the Czech Republic. So how did you end up like from Berkeley here? What's your story?
This is actually, it's a long story. I might want to cut it short a little bit. After graduating with my PhD, I went to the States. It was an exciting time in California at Berkeley. And then after that, I got my position in Austria, actually, as a professor. And ever since I've been a professor there. I think this happened in 2004. Yeah, it's a long time ago. And then 2 years ago, Jan Witek, a colleague of mine here who's leading the other project, he asked me if I want to join him and help him leading these two projects. I said yes. Yeah, I like the challenge very much. So I'm actually now commuting between Austria and Czech Republic.
Nice. And yeah. I mean, we will get back to the specifics of the science and like your area of expertise. But how did it change, like from your PhD and like throughout to what you're doing now, the area of interest or like the type of technology that you work with?
So I went to a whole bunch of different focus areas. For my PhD, I worked on something called automated theorem proving, where you're trying to figure out how to make a computer actually prove mathematical statements automatically, or at least assist you in doing so. So proving mathematics, really, which is at the time was very exciting and still is very difficult project or very difficult topic. And then I went to Berkeley and I changed topics because of the funding situation. There was interest in something called embedded systems. And so we did some research in embedded systems, and I did that for about 10 years after I graduated, right? Even when I went to Austria, I worked on this. And then I kind of got, I don't know, I got tired of it a little bit after 10 years of doing this. And so I again changed the field a little bit away from embedded systems towards general systems engineering, where you try to figure out how to develop software like operating systems and tool chains so that programmers can use to program machines. And I've been doing this ever since, with some focus on what's called formal methods, which allow you to basically design something that is hopefully correct as you are doing it, and not just by trial and error. And that actually, this kind of topic area eventually got me to come here. Yeah.
Nice. And I mean, we agreed with Christoph that we'll be very, very honest during this interview, because it's always like good to state the reality of things. And what I'm really interested in is the difference between the different maybe institutions or the approaches, like America versus, you know, being in Salzburg versus being here. And the reality of science, like you've got an incredible brain, and obviously you've got a lot of big questions that you want to solve. What is then the reality of actually trying to put that into practice?
Well, I think there's a few aspects here, and I always want to reach out to young people, to students, right, to give a little bit of an inspiration. So first of all, I think just pure intelligence is only one particular dimension of a multidimensional space, right? So you have to be, in order to do this kind of stuff, you have to be smart, of course, right? But you don't have to be super smart. You don't have to be a genius, and I'm certainly not a genius, okay? The other thing, so you have to kind of be able to understand a certain, you know, kind of complex structure. The next thing that's super important is you have to be really passionate about it, right? It has to be your thing. And actually, when you're young, it's very difficult sometimes to find out what you actually are passionate about. Sometimes you even feel like you are passionate about something, but you're actually not. It's just an illusion, and you actually want to do something else, but you can't admit it because your parents want you to do this other thing. It brings you more money, and I don't know what, they want to protect you. And then the third thing that you'll have to really be able to do is you just have to be disciplined and just keep doing it, right? You can't just give up just because there's a problem here and there and so on. You just have to really not just be passionate, but also be patient and persistent in things. So in my experience over the last, I don't know, 20 years at least, with working with students, it's not just, you know, the super smart students that succeed. It's usually the students that are not necessarily the absolute smartest students, but also the ones that have the other qualities as well. Yeah. And I would describe myself as somebody like this, right? I've been traveling a lot in the past. I've talked to lots of colleagues in the, professors in the world, and there are some that are really brilliant, exceptional, really, truly exceptional. I'm not one of those. So
very, very humble. So how would you say that you're putting, you mentioned 20 years working with students, and it's what you just said there is, I think will resonate a lot with people because, people sometimes often go into tech because they think that it'll earn them money, but it actually is about the problem solving and the scientific beauty underneath. How do you work with people in Big Code, for example, in this regard? Like, how do you solve problems? What are the different things that you work on?
So one of the challenges in science is not so much, at least in the beginning, is not so much like being super smart in solving a difficult problem. Yeah, I mean, you need to have that ability eventually, but in the beginning, usually the even bigger challenge is to figure out what is actually the problem. What is actually the problem you want to solve? Yeah, what is the question that you are asking? So it's very simple, right? You can give an answer, like a solution, right, to a question that is actually irrelevant. So even if the answer is really super smart, but the question is irrelevant, it's useless, right? So the challenge in the beginning is to find the question, not the answer. Yeah, because only giving an answer to a question that's actually interesting, yeah, is what we are trying to do. And there are very different kinds of people, and some ask very interesting questions, and other people ask less interesting questions, right? And they can get very passionate about questions that are actually not so relevant. So this whole thing, we'll need to be careful that we are actually focusing on these relevant questions. And there's no rule really you can't administrate the process of identifying interesting problems. It's not, at least in my experience, it's not possible. So instead, what you'll have to do, the only, I think, way that I found in my career is the only guidance, right, down the road where you have all these different decisions that you can make, and you can work on all kinds of different problems. Nobody tells you really what to work on. The only guidance is that you listen to your inner self, like, what is it that I care about, right? What is it that I can actually be passionate about? And you have to be able to be as truthful as possible to your actual interests. And then you will automatically, almost automatically, you will find something that is worth investigating, right? If you had been properly developing your personality and your knowledge and everything, of course, all this comes together.
Yeah. It's amazing because actually what you mentioned about passion, I've always loved and still love, like almost like illogically, history and archaeology and like finding like the connections between the different things that have happened. But actually having been in tech, I find that the process of answering those problems is actually more in tech than it is in archaeology, which is interesting. And one of the things is that the academia of archaeology is very sometimes like politicized. It's very kind of, it's very difficult to actually find the answer to the genuine question that interests you. And I'm now getting to the point of doing research in, I mean, like this paper that lies in front of you, what you do in Big Code, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But you're asking these big questions that somehow are driven by your passion. How do you write a grant for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there is, of course, there is the issue of producing good science and asking interesting questions and finding good solutions to this. But then there's, of course, also the issue of paying for it, right? And these days, basically, the system works like, I would almost say, and honestly, I hope that some funding agency people are listening here, is that usually a good, an efficient path for funding is you write something up that you want to do that you have at least partially already done anyway. Because then the thing sounds kind of solid and doable because you have already done it, at least to a certain extent. It's not that you are saying it openly, but you have all the papers that you cite and you say, this is what we want to do, but you actually have done at least half of it already, so you're pretty sure that it will actually work and it doesn't sound like completely outrageous. So that's one strategy that you can follow. But I think the higher level story here is that you basically try to promise something about the future, and then people will look at it and they will say, well, this sounds like you can actually do it and it's an interesting question, and then you do it. But then when you actually get the money and you sit down and you work on it, it makes you actually discover new questions that you haven't even thought about as you are writing this application for money. And then what happens is that you steer off and you go a completely different path that was impossible to predict at the time of writing of this application, right? And that's usually the reality. And then at the end, right, when you finalize the project, you'll have to squeeze everything that you did, even though it might be completely off track. You have to squeeze it back into the report and say, well, we actually did exactly what we wanted to do, because that's the rules of the game, right? Which is kind of a bit of a silly game to play, but that's what's happening. So it basically just shows that trying to manage science and administrate it is a very difficult problem. I would even say it's an impossible problem. But at the same time, of course, I understand the interest of funding agency to increase the efficiency of their funding, right? They want for each dollar or euro or crown they invest, right? They want the highest possible outcome of awards and impact and papers and patents and all this stuff. I understand that too. But I don't think we have a final answer for doing this properly.
And I guess like with the questions that genuinely interest you or anyone, they're usually kind of high risk, high gain. So like promising that kind of return per dollar is very difficult, because exactly if you knew the answer, you wouldn't be doing the research in the first place.
Yeah. If I would, for example, with this paper that's lying here on the desk, I could have never planned this. No way. This thing just happened.
How? Tell us how it happened.
It just happens because people suddenly show up. I mean, one important thing is that we have a very nice international research group here, and it attracts people from all over the world, right? And that increases the chances that something like this happens. Simply out of, just because you put people into the same room that would otherwise never meet, okay? And you can only do this by creating an environment, an international research group where people feel welcomed, there's diversity, and everyone is essentially interested in the same technical problems and so on. And then once you have this mix of people and you start talking, then sometimes something comes out of this that can never be predicted, because of different interests that then suddenly seem to intersect. Like these days, science is very complex, and usually there is high gain if you actually are able to combine expertise in different areas. Then you can do often something new. Whereas it's very hard to, if you just stick to one area, it's very hard to make significant progress there. Yeah. So.
I mean, we keep circling around this beautiful paper, which I will steal afterwards, and I'll read it in the bus on the way home. But how did that come about? The story is really interesting. Like, how did you even come about writing this? It's very new, very fresh, very interdisciplinary in many ways. So, can you tell us a little bit about it, please?
Yeah. So there was my colleague actually. He hired a new student from Peru, Stephanie, right? Maybe a bit more than half a year ago, and I think he met her at a conference when conferences were still like real, and so he invited her to become an intern here for a year in our group. And originally, when she joined, she worked on a different kind of project, but then she reached out to me and asked me, because she read some of my papers and looked at the things that I'm doing. And she asked if we can work together. And then she explained actually to me quantum computing, because surprisingly, even though she's young and has bachelor degrees in computer science, she already worked on quantum computing for her bachelor thesis back in Peru. And she tried to explain this stuff to me, and I was very skeptical because I'm one of these old-fashioned computer scientists who don't want to deal with quantum computing. It's like, makes you feel obsolete and old because you don't understand anything, and the mathematics is super complicated, and it's not my mathematics, it's very different. So it would require me to learn all this stuff, and I don't want to do that. I just want to teach and have students learn new stuff. So she tried to explain this to me, and she didn't give up. That was the first step. So she has that quality. She's super passionate about it. She's smart, she's super passionate about it, and she doesn't give up. So that's the thing, right? So and it took me a long time to understand it. Like, we are talking weeks, right? And I just wanted to get rid of the topic. And eventually I understood it, actually. And then I saw the potential, the overlap of that work with my work, right? So I saw that there's a common ground, and that we can, or that we might be able to do something. So we were asking questions and not so much giving answers, because we didn't know how to actually do any of this, right? We just thought like, okay, if we can do this, then we can ask that particular question and might be able to find an answer and so on. So we kept doing this. And then after yet another few weeks, right, we eventually figured out how to do something really interesting and really nice, completely unplanned, completely unpredictable. And after 6 weeks, we wrote a paper, a 12-page, dense, very technical paper, and sent it to a top conference in programming languages. So, and now we are waiting for the verdict.
Nice. I will have everything crossed, and if you need another enthusiast in your group, I would love to, because oh my God, we need to have another discussion about this. And we were actually planning that another technology Foresight will be into the deep dive of this paper when you've got the verdict, and we can talk a little bit more about it. But maybe as kind of like the last inspiration, because this has been incredibly inspirational, and it kind of combined like the soft side of like what it means to be a human and like investigating the world around you, and also like how to navigate the kind of scientific field. But what is the question that really drives you right now? What is the thing that I hate these phrases? What gets you up in the morning? But like what is the academic thing that really gets you going?
So basically, there's two things now. 2 months ago, before I discovered this with Stephanie, there was one thing that was driving me, which is a textbook that I'm writing on basic principles of computer science for general audiences, or let's say at least for young students interested in this stuff, and I'm still not done with it. And now I'm even in a worse situations because I just wasted 2 months on doing something completely different, had zero time for the book, so I have to get back to this. But now I have also this question that even though we solved an important question now, there's a lot of future work, right? We can do all kinds of things. Now it opens up a whole new world of new questions that we can ask and then explore good answers to this, which is basically quantum computing, the intersection of quantum computing with programming languages, with systems engineering, where you worry about building infrastructural software, and also formal methods, which means how can you use this whole quantum stuff to be able to produce correct software, maybe to be able to solve problems that you can otherwise not solve. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
My mind is slightly blown, ladies and gentlemen, but in order to unblow it again, we will do another version of a technology foresight with Christoph once you've had a rest over Christmas, because you must be exhausted right now. But thank you so much for joining us here today.
Sure.
It was a huge pleasure. Thank you. And I hope that you're as inspired as I am. And I will see you soon with another episode. And if you haven't watched the episode with Stephanie yet, then do, because we've already done that one as well, where she talks about quantum computing. So she's very passionate, very persistent.
Yes,
it's good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.